Thanks, Liz. Thanks for inviting us to join you today, and thanks everyone for joining us. So I guess you just heard a bit of background in terms of why I'm so passionate about the cooperative business model. Having worked in both public and corporate environments, I really now only truly appreciate the value that these businesses do provide, and especially while we're going through the pandemic as we are right now, and seeing these organisations come together and their members collaborating to navigate what is a very challenging time, as you're all aware of. And one of the reasons for wanting to come and talk to you as an audience is recognition that you are already and going to be the future leaders of New Zealand's startups and businesses that grow, and the fact that you've got Icehouse behind you, backing you to get these businesses off the ground. As we tend to see, you tend to be very successful. So the reason for wanting to come and join you today is really to make sure that you have visibility of the business model as you start out on your journey, and that you consider it. So I'll just share my screen so that you can see some slides that I've got for you. Does that come up, Liz? Great. Okay, so just to take you a bit of set the scene for you in terms of who we are and what we do.
Roz, just one thing, Roz, you're in not in presentation mode. I don't know whether that matters, but you're not in the the mode where we can see both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just see. See why that's doing that. You should be seeing it. Whoops, shot through. Sorry, people.
We're seeing your notes pages.
Yeah, no, that's very strange. Apologies.
It's okay. It was working before, which is strange.
Yeah. I might just run with it as it is, because it looks like I cool. Actually change that view. So apologies, everyone. So really just wanting to give you a bit of a heads up in terms of who we are and what we do. So Cooperative Business NZ's the professional membership body for New Zealand's co-ops. And you'll see here that we've got a really broad range of members. They sit across multiple sectors. Obviously, there's quite a significant proportion that sit in the agri space, but then you've got a whole lot in the retail area with regards to foodstuffs and Mitre 10 and ITM, BuildLink, etc. Plumbing World sits in there. We've got a whole lot of irrigation companies. So it's very broad in terms of the organisations that form co-ops to enable delivery of their business. And so us as an organisation, really we're here to, fundamentally we're here to bring our members together and enable them to share experiences. We also act as a champion body, so not dissimilar to Hort New Zealand or Dairy New Zealand. We actually go and engage with government and lobby in terms of legislative change and that type of activity. But then we also do a whole lot of advocacy. So me being here today is part of that advocacy piece. And then extending on from that is around building capability. So one of the things that we've found is that there's not a lot in terms of specialist co-op studies here in New Zealand. So we get engaged in terms of providing governance education. And one of the things that I'll talk a little bit about later is around that whole governance body. So in a cooperative, your governors are shareholders. And so they will sit on your actual board of directors. And so what we do is we provide education and training in that space. So just a little bit about the fundamental principles of a co-op. So you'll see here that you've got the actual cooperative model, the body itself, and Liz just mentioned that they employ about 50,000 people across those organisations that I put up before. And then in terms of the members sitting underneath that, the transacting members, they will actually, as a rule of thumb, they'll either pay funds in as a membership fee annually for services from their co-op, and then those any profits made at the end of the financial year will be shared back out with the members. So it's a very, very successful model, and we've found that these organisations tend to be highly resilient through these periods of change that we're experiencing right now, because the members tend to come together and recognise that they need to work for the greater good. And the majority of these organisations come about because they're looking to do things in a slightly different way. So I'll just take you through some of the advantages of the actual model itself. I mentioned before about it's about people coming together for the greater good. They tend to be owned by their members, shareholders, so they're transacting members. So you might hear the terminology dry shares. Those are non-transacting members, and so the product or the service can be, let's say, Fonterra, obviously it's milk, Silver Fern Farms, it's meat. From a banking perspective, it's actually you as a consumer actually utilising that service or product. And the value to the member is basically, it's based on patronage. So how much goods or services that you're trading with the cooperative itself. But as a co-op member, even so, let's say with Fonterra, you might have a farm that's this size versus a farm that's this size. They still only get one vote. So it's about democracy and shared ownership. So these models tend to be very successful in terms of multi-generational businesses, and so they make they're very highly sustainable. And as I said before, the control remains with the active trading members. So those people who've got dry shares, as a rule of thumb, don't get voting rights. But the dry shares potentially might be from private equity partners that you might potentially look to engage with as you go on this journey. Elsewhere with this, we've got internationally recognised principles, which I'll drop into. They're called the Rochdale Principles. So it doesn't matter whether you set these organisations up here in New Zealand or internationally, the same guiding principles apply. And you'll find that all of the constitutions that are put in place have the same guiding principles in them. And they tend to come about as a result of market imbalance. So the first of these organisations was set up as a bank where members came together to form the bank, and then they started transacting funds to enable each other to have access to money. And finally there, it's about the profits remaining in the country of origin. So it doesn't mean to say that you can't have multi-country cooperatives. We do have a number who operate cross-border, but the key thing is that those organisations or individuals sitting within that country, the profits remain in their country of origin, which is quite important as we see right now today. So I've just put on the right-hand side there in terms of the types of cooperatives that we tend to see. And I've just touched on a few of those, but what's quite neat and might be relevant to a number of you is the whole platform co-op. So that's basically technology-driven co-ops, and we've got some quite exciting ones coming about. If you think about a platform co-op like Uber, for example, obviously it's not a co-op, but if you thought about the taxi drivers being the shareholder members, and they actually own the Uber platform itself, and then they would share in the profits. Whereas at the moment, that's a corporate model. So, but hopefully that gives you a sense of the types of organisations. So I just drop into the actual Rochdale Principles. These were the principles I mentioned before, and they are internationally understood and recognised. It's really their open and voluntary membership. So if someone comes to the table and they've got the product or the service, they have to be welcomed in. You can't put the hand up. And it's all about that democracy, membership, ownership and control. It's about participation. So you really have the opportunity to pool the resources. The key thing is about independence and creating the opportunity for individuals who are part of the cooperative to become self-responsible, being independent. And co-ops tend to support their members by providing education and training. So it's about upskilling. We see a lot of collaboration. So a fundamental principle of co-ops is that they tend to support each other. So the neat thing with a lot of our members is that they work together. So let's say you've got a Silver Fern Farms sitting around that you'll have a Balance or a Ravensdown, you'll have Farmlands or a Rural Co, you'll have a LIC, you might have a, obviously a Foodstuffs. So there's lots of different cooperatives and they all work together and support each other. And the other one that is really key is that whole concern for community. So right now, with responding to the UN sustainability goals, that need for a social conscience, I think there's a recognition that internationally we can't keep doing what we've been doing in terms of corporates that are focusing on profits for at the expense of all else. And so this is something that we're seeing coming to light. I just put this slide up because it's just a nice way of showing, in the scheme of things, New Zealand's tiny in terms of our co-ops, but there's 3 million cooperative businesses internationally, and there are about 1.2 billion members. So that they create a huge number of jobs, just for the co-ops, but themselves, but also for the broader community. So I just quickly take you through the New Zealand co-op landscape, and I apologise that you probably won't be able to see this, but this is just to show you historically that they were first established in New Zealand in the mid-1800s. And so we just celebrated SBS's 150th year, and next year we're celebrating Fonterra's 150th year. So they are very fundamental to the way that we've done business here in New Zealand, and they tend to be much more resilient. So if you compare a cooperative being established versus corporate being established, the likelihood of them still being operating in 5 years' time is significantly greater for a co-op, and the reason being that you've got people who've got skin in the game. So that's basically the fundamental. The reason for those photos on the right, which I always find quite intriguing, is you sometimes hear that co-ops are old and traditional and out of date, and yes, those photos do show some historical times, but funnily enough, those trucks at the bottom, those are actually milk trucks, and they are driven by battery powered engines. So even back then, these organisations were looking at technology and being quite innovative in their thinking. So just a quick summary in terms of New Zealand's co-ops. So if you look at the top 300, I know that there's some news with regards to Fonterra having slipped slightly, just because it's sold off a number of assets, but it's still sitting in that top 300. But of the top 300 co-ops in the world, we've got 4 that actually appear in that. So it does show you how significant we are reliant upon the co-ops in New Zealand. And as it says here, in 2014, we were listed as the most cooperative economy, which basically means we had the most cooperatives compared to other economies. We are quite skewed in terms of agri and food. If you look internationally, it's far more in the insurance, banking and financial services space. So we have quite a different sort of makeup in New Zealand. And typically in New Zealand, we don't do, most co-ops have minimal external investment. The funding is from the actual business owners. Now, I recognise that there'll be a number of you out there that potentially are looking to get VC funding or private equity, and your key challenge there is to make sure that you get a funder who has got the same vision as you, and then they're not looking to extract their money in 2 to 3 years and triple their investment. So it's really understanding who are the organisations that potentially want to come on the journey with you. This slide here, I won't go into in any real detail, but it's just basically to say that the green boxes there in terms of the co-ops, they employ 50,000, but the actual members are around about 1.5 million members across New Zealand. 800,000 members of Southern Cross, which is interesting, 10,000 members of Fonterra. So the skew in terms of the revenues is quite different when it comes to actual industry sectors and members. So I think, you've got a third of the New Zealand population that's engaged with cooperatives, And we don't at the moment have any real visibility in terms of the number of employees of those members. So again, it actually extends a lot further than what we've got visibility of. I just put this up here because depending on what sort of organisation you're trying to establish, there's a whole lot of different legislation that you can establish a co-op under, and this can lead to some confusion. But as long as you go to the right lawyers in terms of getting the right advice, then they can point you down the path of which of these legislative models is right given your business. So just a quick summary of the importance of the model to New Zealand. As Liz said, 19% of GDP enables profits to remain in New Zealand. Very impactful in terms of both urban and regional New Zealand, and obviously significant employer of local staff. Majority of the manufacturing is done in New Zealand, even though Fonterra has quite a few manufacturing sites offshore. The majority of it is undertaken in New Zealand. And these businesses are highly successful brands. They have got some brilliant people that work within them, and I have to say I'm very privileged to get to work with them. So as I mentioned before, it's about that whole skin in the game. Most of them have got very trusted products and services and brands, and they're proven for multiple generations and decades. And again, with regards to those sustainability goals. So they'll be quite key in terms of achieving those outcomes. And down the bottom there on the right-hand side, you'll see those sustainability goals. Most of our members are already reporting SDG goals as part of their annual reports. So some of the challenges you do need to be aware of, because every model is not perfect, but because there is limited education and training on the model, there tends to be some lack of understanding when it comes to talking to government and regulators. So there's a lot of work that I do in terms of making sure that they understand the impact of changes in legislation. And in terms of, as I said, in terms of legal advice and financial advice that you might go to seek, you want to make sure that you're going to the right organisations, because not everyone understands the business model and they may not apply it in quite the right way. I mentioned before in terms of governance, so one of the challenges is to make sure that you've got really strong governors sitting on your board. So most of the constitutions will have the a note around having independent directors sitting on the board as well as shareholder directors. But when you're small, you tend to have all shareholder directors. So how do you make sure that you've got the right shareholder directors to get the skill set coming onto your board? So that's one thing. The other thing is access to capital and then retention of capital to enable reinvestment. So obviously you've got that really interesting tension between having shareholders who want to generate profit and maximise profit versus the co-op that's actually looking to invest for the future. And so it's about getting that balance right. So it's a healthy tension, and I guess that's why it's so important to make sure you've got the right shareholder directors sitting on your board. And in terms of your establishing your co-op and getting access to capital, there are banks that are very open to working with you. The key thing is to make sure that you've got a good, strong business case to warrant them investing funds. And I know from talking to a number of CEOs of the banks right now, they are sitting on pots of cash and they're wanting to invest, but they want good investments that they can have some confidence in. And yeah, so I think there's an opportunity there. The succession planning, making sure that you've got future people coming into the organisation to replace the people that you currently have. Senior leadership teams in terms of making sure they've got the right skill sets to drive these businesses successfully. I've already mentioned the tension between executive and shareholder in the UN sustainability. Migrant seasonal workers, some of our members are reliant upon migrant seasonal workers and highly skilled workers and bringing them into the country. So right now for them, that is a big challenge. And then media, unfortunately, we've got quite a lot of media where potentially they don't have the full story and they can misconstrue some of the messaging with regards to the business model and why some of them fail. But, you know, the reality is a lot of corporates fail. We don't see anywhere near the same level of interest, but when a co-op fails, because a lot of the time it's actually people's livelihoods, we see a lot of negative media about that. So I just really wanted to mention to you, why would you form a co-op, and thinking through some of the reasons why it will add significant value. We've talked about navigating periods of adversity, that collective buying power. You know, New Zealand is geographically removed. It's a really good opportunity to collaborate and look at how your supply chain works. We do have a limited market size, so a lot of our co-ops do export. So it's about how do we actually navigate that labour cost and look at reducing that down. We are seen in New Zealand as being the leaders in sustainability and social reform, so it's an opportunity to leverage off that. And we are known to be very innovative and collaborative in terms of how we work together. So again, it's an opportunity to succeed globally. Yeah, and I think the neat thing is that the principles are very closely aligned with the New Zealand psyche, but not just that, but if you look at iwi and you think about the model, it's very aligned with the Maori principles as well. And so I think there's a big opportunity there. If any of you are looking at engaging with Maori in terms of any of your business ideas, then this really is a very valuable opportunity or model that you could apply.